the silence after midnight. That's when heaven speaks loudest. Right now, as you're watching this, somewhere in your community, someone who mocked your warnings is pacing their floor, unable to sleep. Their hands are trembling, not from the cold, but from the truth they can no longer deny. What if I told you that every whisper behind your back, every sideways glance when you spoke the truth, every moment they made you feel crazy for seeing what others couldn't? What if all of it was orchestrated, not by human hands alone, but by forces that knew exactly who you were before you did? This is not a coincidence that you're here. Not at this hour. Not with that weight on your chest. Not with those tears that won't stop falling because finally, someone understands. They tried to silence you. Oh, how they tried. Cast you out like you were the problem. Labeled you difficult, too spiritual, dramatic. But here's what they didn't count on. You can't bury light. You can't drown truth. And you certainly can't stop what heaven has already decreed. Something shifted 3 nights ago. Did you feel it? That strange electricity in the air? That moment when the spiritual atmosphere changed? The very people who rolled their eyes at your discernment are now Googling spiritual warfare at 3 a.m. The ones who said you were paranoid are double-checking their locks, not understanding why they suddenly feel exposed. But you're not afraid. You're vindicated. Because everything, and I mean everything you tried to warn them about, is unfolding like a scroll written in heaven's court. What they called your weakness was actually heaven's strategy. What they named as your isolation was divine preparation. And that community that cast you out, they're about to discover they didn't just reject a person, they rejected their own protection. Thank you to every single one of you who has supported this message through super thanks. Your generosity means more than you know. You're not just donating, you're helping spread light to others who feel alone in their calling. Whether you give or not, I'm deeply grateful for your presence here. Your support, your time, your attention, it all matters. And if this message resonates with your soul, go ahead and plant that seed. Heaven sees every act of faith. Beloved, what you're about to witness in this video isn't just vindication, it's revelation. Because when God marks someone as chosen, hell itself can conspire, but it cannot prevail. And what happened next? What happened when they finally saw what you saw all along? Let's just say, even the darkness had to bow. They wanted a reaction. They got a revolution. When they pushed you to the edge, mocked your warnings, and painted you as the village fool who saw demons in daylight, you did something they never expected. You stopped talking. Not because you had nothing left to say, but because heaven whispered, "Let the silence speak." And oh, how it speaks now. You see, they mistook your quietness for defeat. They high-fived each other thinking they'd finally shut you up. Thank God, they said. The troublemaker is finally done, stirring the pot. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, is that your silence wasn't submission. It was a divine alarm clock, set to go off at the perfect moment. While they celebrated your apparent surrender, something shifted in the spiritual realm. Your words stopped, but heaven's case continued building. Every tear you shed in private was entered as evidence. Every prayer you whispered at 3 a.m. was recorded in the courts above. Every moment you bit your tongue instead of defending yourself, that restraint became ammunition for what was coming. They thought your silence was weakness, but your stillness was the sound of heaven building the case. Now look at them. The same people who rolled their eyes when you spoke are wide-eyed with terror, not because of what you're saying you're still quiet, but because everything you warned them about is manifesting in high definition. The betrayals you sensed, the hidden agendas you exposed, the spiritual attacks you predicted. It's all happening. And your silence? It's become the loudest testimony in the room. They can't escape it. Your absence speaks volumes. Your quietness haunts their gatherings. Where once they drowned out your voice with their noise, now they're suffocating in the echo of what you didn't say. They're learning that divine strategy doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and sometimes it says nothing at all. You didn't argue with their accusations. You didn't defend your reputation. You didn't waste breath on deaf ears. Instead, you let heaven handle the prosecution. And now, as the truth unfolds like a scroll they can't stop reading, they're realizing something bone-chilling. Your silence wasn't giving up, it was giving notice. Every day you stayed quiet, the spiritual pressure built. Every moment you chose stillness over strife, the divine case grew stronger. You became a walking prophecy that didn't need words. Your very presence or absence became the alarm they couldn't shut off. And here's the beautiful irony. They thought they silenced you, but all they did was amplify heaven's voice. Because when a chosen one goes quiet, it's not retreat, it's reload. When God's warrior stops speaking, it's because the battle has already moved from words to manifestation. Your silence was never weakness, it was heaven's secret weapon. And now they can't unhear what you never had to say. They told you that you were seeing things that weren't there, making mountains out of molehills, creating drama where there was peace. But here's the divine joke: you weren't paranoid, you were prophetic. And the difference between those two words? About 3 months and a whole lot of public exposure. You felt it first, didn't you? That shift in the atmosphere when certain people walked in the room. The way conversation suddenly stopped when you appeared. How smiles never quite reached their eyes. Your spirit was picking up frequencies they didn't even know they were broadcasting. You weren't imagining the whispers. You were intercepting spiritual intelligence meant to stay hidden. They called you crazy for noticing patterns. You're too sensitive, they said. You're reading too much into things. Meanwhile, you were reading the room like a book written in invisible ink, and heaven was shining the blacklight. Every red flag you pointed out, they painted white. Every warning you gave, they called negativity. But prophets have never been popular at parties. Ask Jeremiah. Ask Noah. Ask anyone who saw the flood coming, while everyone else was still dancing. You know what really burned them? You didn't need proof to know the truth. Your spirit had already filed the report before their masks even started slipping. While they were performing their Oscar-worthy performances of loyalty and love, your discernment was backstage taking notes. You saw the betrayal brewing in their body language, felt the witchcraft in their well wishes, tasted the poison in their compliments, and when you tried to warn others, they sided with the actors, not the audience. But watch what's happening now. Those secret meetings you sensed, they're being exposed in group texts. The hidden agendas you felt, they're showing up in screenshots. The spiritual attacks you described, people are waking up with the same symptoms you had 3 years ago. Suddenly, everyone's a believer in spiritual warfare. Funny how reality has a way of making profits out of the paranoid. Here's what they'll never admit. Your perception terrified them. Because someone who can see in the spirit realm can't be controlled by natural manipulation. They needed you to doubt yourself, to question your gift, to silence your warnings. Why? Because your accuracy was their kryptonite. Your discernment was dismantling their deceptions before they could even fully execute them. They laughed while you cried those lonely nights, wondering if you really were losing your mind. But look who's crying now. Look who's frantically searching for explanations to the chaos you predicted. Look who's suddenly interested in those dreams you tried to share. Those visions they mocked. Those gut feelings they dismissed. You didn't imagine it, you intercepted it. You didn't create the storm. You just had the weather radar, while everyone else was planning picnics. And now that the thunder's rolling in, they're all scrambling for the umbrella you offered 3 seasons ago. You were never paranoid. You were just early to the revelation party, and prophecy, it always arrives right on time. They weren't confused, they were comfortable. And comfort, beloved, is where conviction goes to die. You remember their faces, don't you? Not the ones who attacked you open-lino. Those were easy to identify. I'm talking about the others. The ones who smiled at you on Sunday morning, then disappeared when the whispers started. The ones who knew your heart, who'd eaten at your table, who'd prayed with you in your darkest hours. And when the mob came for you, they suddenly had somewhere else to be. They saw it all happening, every single thing. When false accusations flew like arrows, they ducked. When you stood alone, speaking truth in rooms full of lies, they studied their shoes. When the leaders painted targets on your back, these good people became ghosts, not because they didn't know better, but because knowing better would have cost them their comfort. And here's what breaks the heart of heaven. Their silence wasn't neutral. It was a vote. Every time they chose to say nothing, They were saying everything. When they watched you get cast out and kept their mouths shut, they weren't just observers, they were participants. They told themselves they were keeping the peace. But whose peace? Not God's, not yours. They were keeping their peace. Their position, their place at tables that should have been overturned. You see, beloved, in the courtroom of heaven, there's no such thing as an innocent bystander when truth is on trial. When light is being suffocated and you hold your breath instead of speaking up, you become complicit with the darkness. They knew. Oh, how they knew. They felt the shift when you walked in the room. They heard the hollow ring in the leaders' voices. They saw the patterns of manipulation, the favoritism, the spiritual abuse dressed up as ministry. But admitting it would have meant admitting they'd been cowards. So they chose blindness. They chose deafness. They chose the comfort of their chains over the discomfort of your freedom. But here's where divine justice gets interesting. Those same people who let you burn alone, they're burning now. Not from attack, from abandonment. The very system they protected instead of you has turned on them. The leaders they chose over truth have shown their true colors. The peace they preserved by sacrificing you has become a prison they can't escape. And the beautiful, terrible irony, they're experiencing exactly what they watched you endure. Only this time, there's no one left with enough courage to warn them. Because they silenced the watchman, they exiled the alarm, they traded their protector for their comfort. Now they're Googling your name at midnight, replaying conversations, wondering if maybe, just maybe, you were right all along. Some are even reaching out, testing the waters, hoping you've forgotten their betrayal. But you haven't forgotten. You've forgiven, that's different. You've released them, but you haven't rewritten history. Because when they watched you get cast out and said nothing, they sealed their own fate. They weren't confused, beloved. They were complicit. And now they're learning that God keeps perfect records of who stands with his chosen and who stands aside. You didn't come with a wrecking ball. You came with a candle. But in a house built on lies, even the smallest flame becomes an inferno, not because fire destroys, but because darkness can't survive when light shows up. They're calling you the troublemaker now, the one who ruined everything, the peace disturber, the unity breaker. But here's what they won't admit at 3 a.m. when their conscience won't let them sleep. You didn't shatter unity, you shattered illusion. You were never the destroyer, you were the revealer. Think about it. When you walked into that room, that meeting, that family gathering, what really happened? Did you attack? Did you accuse? Did you throw stones? Number. You simply existed. You breathed truth. You refused to bow to the script everyone else was reading from. And that refusal, that's what terrified them. Because broken systems need actors, not truth-tellers. They had spent years, decades, even building their house of cards. Every Sunday smile hiding Monday's manipulation. Every blessed and highly favored covering up spiritual bankruptcy. Every hallelujah masking the hollowness. The foundation was rotten, beloved. Termites of deception had been eating away at the structure for so long that all it took was one person on a toe stop pretending, and the whole facade began to crack. Truth didn't break the house, it just flipped the lights on. And oh, what those lights revealed. The secret meetings you weren't invited to, the decisions made about your life without your voice, the alliances formed against you while they smiled in your face. The financial games, the power plays dressed up as prophecy, the control disguised as care. You see, light doesn't need to be violent. Light just needs to be present, and your presence, it was like sunrise in a vampire's lair. They couldn't handle what your authenticity exposed about their performance. They called it disruption, heaven called it diagnosis. Here's what shook them to their core. You didn't fight their system, you transcended it. While they were playing checkers with people's souls, you were operating from a different realm entirely. They expected you to play by their rules, gossip for gossip, manipulation for manipulation, politics for politics. But you did something they never saw coming. You stood still, you stayed true, you refused to dance. And in that stillness, in that refusal to perform, their entire system short-circuited. Because corruption needs participation. Dysfunction needs agreement. Deception needs actors. But you resigned from the show. Not with fanfare. Not with drama. Just with quiet, unwavering truth. The community isn't shook because you broke something precious. They're shook because you revealed that what they called precious was actually poison. What they called peace was actually paralysis. What they called unity was actually unanimous deception. You weren't the earthquake. You were the fault line they'd been building on. Now they have to face the truth. The system was already broken. You just had the audacity to stop pretending it wasn't. They tried to bury your voice, not knowing heaven archived every word. You remember the day they turned on you, don't you? The moment your truth became too bright for their shadows. They gathered in their circles, some in person, some online, crafting narratives about who you were. Bitter, they said. Rebellious. Too deep for their own good. They painted you as the villain in a story where you were actually the lifeline they refused to grab. But here's what they never understood. You don't cancel someone carrying heaven's mail. They thought silencing you would erase the message. They thought if they could discredit the messenger, the truth would die with your reputation. So they worked overtime, twisted your words, took your warnings out of context, made you sound unstable when you were the only stable voice in a room full of people drunk on denial. They canceled you on earth, but God reposted you in the spirit. And now those same words they mocked are echoing through their reality like thunder they can't escape. The warnings they laughed at are unfolding like a divine screenplay. Scene by scene, exactly as you said. They're hearing your voice in their dreams, seeing your predictions in their headlines, feeling your truth in their bones. You see, when heaven seals a message, it doesn't matter if the whole world tries to delete it. It's written in dimensions they can't access, stored in vaults they can't raid, protected by forces they can't even perceive. They tried to make you irrelevant. Instead, they made you inevitable. Every blog post they wrote against you, heaven turned it into evidence. Every whisper campaign they launched, the angels documented it as testimony. Every time they said your name with contempt, they were unknowingly prophesying your vindication. Because here's the divine irony. The harder they tried to erase you, the more permanent your message became. They thought they were writing your obituary. They were actually writing your legacy. And now they're scrambling, trying to remember exactly what you said, searching through old texts, old emails, trying to find the warnings they deleted in their arrogance. Some are even reaching out, cautiously, nervously, asking, what was that thing you said about? But you're not gloating. You're not even responding. Because you understand something they're just beginning to grasp. The message was never yours to defend. It was heaven's to fulfill. They labeled you too spiritual, not realizing that was exactly the credential heaven required. They said you were too deep, not understanding that shallow waters can't carry eternal truth. They called you difficult. Translation, unopenable by their manipulation. Your voice didn't die. It went underground. It traveled through spiritual frequencies they couldn't jam. It planted itself in hearts they couldn't harden. And now, it's sprouting everywhere, all at once in a harvest they can't stop. The messenger they tried to cancel? Heaven just gave you a megaphone that echoes through eternity. The sound you're hearing? That's not thunder. That's the sound of facades cracking across your entire community. Right now, while you're watching this, someone who swore you were crazy is staring at their phone in disbelief. The text messages they thought were deleted? Screenshot. The secret meetings they held about you? Recorded. The lies they wrapped in Sunday smiles? Unraveling like cheap thread in holy fire. You saw the pattern. Now they're living in the fallout. Remember when they gathered in small circles, whispering your name like it was poison? Remember how they'd stop talking when you walked by, then smile, that plastic smile that never reached their eyes? They thought their performance was flawless. They thought the mask was permanent. But here's what they didn't understand. When God decides it's time for exposure, there's no filter strong enough, no reputation solid enough, no alliance tight enough to stop what's coming. What they buried is rising, not in whispers and headlines. The pillar of the community who led the charge against you? Their spouse just found the receipts. The ones who called you paranoid for sensing darkness? They're watching their own children expose family secrets on social media. The spiritual leader who gaslit you from the pulpit, their congregation is dwindling as truth after truth surfaces like bodies in shallow water. This isn't karma. This is divine justice wearing work clothes. You didn't need to lift a finger. You didn't post the expose. You didn't make the phone calls. You just stood still and let heaven handle the prosecution. Because when you're truly chosen, God doesn't just fight your battles. He makes your vindication a public spectacle for His glory. They're scrambling now. Emergency meetings at midnight. Damage control, that's not controlling anything. PR statements that sound like confessions. The very people who moved in coordinated attacks against you can't even coordinate their own stories anymore. Their testimonies don't match. Their alibis have holes. Their confidence has evaporated like morning mist meeting the sun. Watch how they stumble over simple questions now. Watch how their eyes dart when someone mentions accountability. Watch how they suddenly need to take a break from ministry or step back for personal reasons. The mask isn't just slipping, it's melting. And you're sitting in perfect peace, watching the show you didn't produce but somehow became the star witness in. Every tear they caused you became evidence. Every prayer you prayed in isolation became testimony. Every time you chose silence over scandal, heaven was taking notes. The community that once stood united against you is now turning on each other, pointing fingers, assigning blame, trying to figure out who leaked what not, realizing that heaven doesn't need informants when it has angels. You weren't the storm they accused you of being. You were the calm before heaven's hurricane. And now they're learning that when you mess with God's anointed, the universe itself becomes the courtroom. What's hidden in darkness? It's having its grand premiere in broad daylight. And the credits? They all lead back to the one who saw everything from the beginning. They prayed for help. They begged heaven for intervention. They cried out in their secret places for someone to save them from the cycles destroying their peace. And God sent you. But you didn't arrive with a halo. You came with questions that made them squirm. You didn't show up with soft words and gentle corrections. You came with truth so sharp it cut through their carefully constructed lies like a blade through silk. They wanted rescue that felt like a warm blanket. Instead, they got you a mirror they couldn't escape, a voice they couldn't silence, a presence that demanded they face what they'd been running from their entire lives. You weren't what they ordered. You were what they needed. See, beloved, this is where heaven's wisdom confounds human expectation. They thought deliverance would coddle their dysfunction. They imagined help would validate their victim stories, pat them on the back, and tell them everyone else was the problem. They wanted a savior who would fight their battles while they stayed comfortable in their chains. But you showed up demanding they pick up their own sword. You exposed the very behaviors they were protecting. You named the demons they'd made friends with. You pointed at the prison doors they'd locked from the inside. That's why they called you disruptive. That's why they said you were too much. Because confrontation dressed in love looks like conflict to those married to their pain. You weren't the storm, they were the ones refusing to come inside. Think about it. Every warning you gave was shelter they rejected. Every truth you spoke was a lifeboat they wouldn't board. Every boundary you set was a fence protecting them from their own destruction, but they were too busy being offended to notice you were trying to save their lives. They wanted a Messiah who would join their pity party. God sent them a warrior who refused to enable their self-destruction. They wanted sympathy. Heaven sent them surgery. And now that the disasters you predicted are knocking down their doors, now that the very people you warned them about have shown their true colors, now they're starting to understand. You weren't sent to make them comfortable. You were sent to make them free. But freedom terrified them more than bondage ever did. Because freedom meant responsibility. Freedom meant they couldn't blame everyone else anymore. Freedom meant looking in the mirror and admitting they'd been complicit in their own captivity. So they shot the messenger, called you names, spread lies, created distance, convinced themselves you were the enemy. They didn't reject you. They rejected their own deliverance. And that, chosen one, is the tragedy they're only now beginning to comprehend. The very person they pushed away was the answer to every prayer they'd prayed. The one they labeled difficult was the difficulty they needed to grow. The disruption they complained about was heaven interrupting their appointment with destruction. You were never their problem. You were their solution, wearing work clothes instead of church clothes. And now they know it. They tried everything. Every whisper, every scheme, every calculated attempt to dim your light. But here's what they never understood. You can't break a mirror that's been forged in heaven's fire. Now look at you. Just look at you. You walk into a room and the atmosphere shifts. Not because you announce yourself, not because you demand attention, but because your very presence carries a frequency they can't fake, can't match, and can't escape. You've become the walking evidence of everything they said was impossible. Remember when they mocked your tears? When they called your pain dramatic? When they rolled their eyes at your prayers and said you were too much? Well, beloved, now your peace is their torment. Your joy is their judgment. Your silence speaks louder than their shouting ever could. You don't speak it, you live it. And that's what terrifies them, because while they were busy trying to destroy you, something supernatural happened. Every attack they launched became fuel for your transformation. Every lie they spread became fertilizer for your growth. They thought they were burying you, but God was planting you. And now you've bloomed into something they can't look at without seeing their own reflection. Watch how they avoid your eyes now. Notice how their voices drop when you enter the conversation. See how they stumble over their words, trying to explain away the favor that follows you like a shadow. They can't understand it. How did the one they tried to break become unbreakable? How did their victim become their mirror? You want to know the divine joke? While they were plotting your downfall, heaven was orchestrating your uprising. While they whispered in corners, angels were taking notes. While they celebrated what they thought was your defeat, God was preparing a table, and guess who got the seat of honor? You didn't need revenge. Revenge is too small for what God had planned. You became something far more powerful. You became whole, complete, untouchable, not because you fought back, but because you surrendered to a process they'll never understand. You let pain become power. You let betrayal become blessing. You let their rejection become God's selection. And now they see it. Every time they look at you, they're forced to confront what they could have been if they'd chosen love over jealousy, truth over comfort, courage over cowardice. You've become their walking conviction, their breathing judgment, their living reminder that God keeps perfect records. They mocked your pain, now your peace haunts them. They laughed at your struggles, now your strength silences them. They bet against you, now your victories are their verdict. You don't have to say a word. Your glow preaches, your favor prophesies, your existence testifies. You became the mirror they couldn't shatter, because you were never made of glass. You were made of glory. They thought they were watching your funeral. It was your coronation. Right now, in rooms you'll never enter, conversations are happening about you. Not the gossip-filled whispers of before. These are different. Hushed, reverent, confused. The same lips that pronounced you dead are now stammering over your name like it burns their tongue. Because something shifted, and everyone felt it. The doors they slammed in your face, they're swinging open on their own now. The opportunities they said you'd never deserve, landing in your lap without you lifting a finger. The respect they swore you'd never earn, written across faces that can't meet your eyes anymore. This is what divine vindication looks like. Not loud, not boastful, just undeniable. You didn't campaign for this moment. You didn't network your way here. You didn't manipulate a single outcome. You just kept breathing when they tried to suffocate your purpose. You kept standing when they tried to bury your destiny. And now? Now heaven is making a public statement, and you're the headline. Watch how they scramble now. The same people who deleted your number are checking their phones, wondering why you haven't called. The ones who said you were too much are realizing they were too small. The community that cast you out is discovering what it feels like when heaven casts them out of your story. God didn't forget. He just saved the best part for the public scene. See, private victories are sweet. But public vindication? That's surgical. That's when the universe itself becomes your witness stand. When creation testifies on your behalf. When even your enemies have to admit they were wrong. They're watching you rise, and it's breaking their theology. Because in their minds, rejected people stay rejected. Outcasts remain outcasts. The overlooked stay invisible. But you're rewriting their entire understanding of how heaven operates. Every blessing dropping into your life right now is a divine memo they can't ignore. Every door opening is heaven's punctuation mark. Every promotion, every breakthrough, every moment of favor is God saying, "This one is mine. Watch me work." The beautiful part? You're not even trying. That's what's driving them crazy. You're not performing. You're not proving. You're just being. And somehow, that's more powerful than all their politics combined. They prepared speeches about why you'd fail. Now they're speechless watching you soar. This is your season, not because you demanded it, but because heaven declared it. The spotlight they tried to steal is now following you wherever you walk. The stage they pushed you off has become too small for what God is doing through you. And the community that once shook their heads at you, they're shaking now. But for different reasons. Because when heaven promotes someone, hell can file all the complaints it wants. The verdict still stands. You are chosen. You are vindicated. And everyone knows it now. They never understood why you couldn't just conform. Why you couldn't just smile at the dysfunction. Why you couldn't pretend the generational patterns weren't killing everyone slowly. They called it tradition. You called it bondage. They called it keeping the peace. You called it keeping the curse. And that's when heaven marked you as dangerous. Not dangerous to people, dangerous to principalities, dangerous to patterns that had ruled bloodlines for centuries. You see, beloved, some souls are sent to blend in, but you were sent to break in, to interrupt, to be the holy disruption that makes hell nervous and heaven rejoice. You didn't come to be accepted. You came to dismantle the system. Every time you refused to laugh at what wasn't funny. Every time you questioned why certain behaviors were normalized. Every time you stood up, when everyone else bowed down to dysfunction, you weren't being difficult. You were being divine. Your very presence was a declaration of war against invisible chains that had held your community captive for generations. They mistook your resistance for rebellion. But heaven saw it differently. Heaven saw a breaker, a chain breaker, a curse breaker, a cycle breaker. You are not their echo. You are the interruption. Do you understand what that means? Every family has that one person who refuses to carry the curse forward. Every bloodline has that one soul who says, "This ends with me." Every community has that one voice that won't harmonize with hell's symphony. That's you. That's why they couldn't handle you. Your refusal to participate in their patterns wasn't personal, it was prophetic. The alcoholism that jumped from father to son, it stops with you. The bitterness passed from mother to daughter, it breaks at your feet. The poverty mindset, the victim mentality, the spiritual blindness that everyone accepted as just how we are. You looked at it and said, "Not anymore." And something shifted in the spiritual realm. Conclusion: the sacred vindication has only just begun. Beloved, as we close this divine appointment together, let me remind you of what heaven wants etched on your heart tonight. You were never paranoid, you were perceiving. Your exile wasn't rejection. It was divine protection. Your silence wasn't weakness. It was heaven's strategy. And that community that tried to erase you, they just became witnesses to your coronation. Remember this. Every warning you gave that fell on deaf ears is now echoing in their sleepless nights. Every truth you spoke that they mocked is now their reality. You didn't just survive their storm, you became the calm that exposes their chaos. But here's what matters most. You are not alone in this. Never have been. Never will be. Right now, across this nation, thousands of chosen ones are watching this with tears streaming down their faces because finally, someone put words to their journey. This isn't just your story, it's our story. We are a hidden army of overcomers, scattered but sovereign, isolated, but never alone. Let me ask you this. If God took every rejection, every betrayal, every moment of isolation, and used it to prepare you for this moment of vindication, what else is He preparing you for that you haven't even imagined yet? Sit with that, because your vindication season isn't ending, it's expanding. Now, let's seal this moment in prayer. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, put your hand over your heart. Heavenly Father, I speak directly to the heart of every chosen one watching this. Lord, you see them, right where they are, in that chair, on that bed, in that car. You see the tears they've cried in silence. You've counted every night they wondered if you'd forgotten them. God, I ask you now, flood their life with undeniable evidence of your favor. Open doors that no human hand can shut. Elevate them in the very rooms where they were rejected. Let their vindication be so public, so powerful, that even their enemies have to acknowledge your hand. Heal what was broken. Restore what was stolen. Multiply what remains. And Lord, give them the grace to walk in this vindication with humility, knowing it's not about them, it's about your glory being revealed. For every chosen one who felt crazy, who felt alone, who felt abandoned, remind them tonight that you were writing their comeback story in the heavens while they were weeping on earth. We declare, the isolation is over. The vindication has begun, and the best is yet to come. In the mighty name that makes demons flee and angels stand at attention, amen. Family, if this message found you at the exact moment you needed it, that's not coincidence, that's confirmation. Drop a comment below. Tell us your story. Where are you watching from? What warning did you give that's now coming true? Your testimony might be exactly what another chosen one needs to hear tonight. Share this video with someone who's been labeled too spiritual or too sensitive. Someone who's been cast out for seeing too clearly. They need to know their vindication season has arrived. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for being part of this divine conversation. Your presence here matters more than you know. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is your invitation to join our family of chosen ones. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, because what's coming next will shake the very foundations of everything they said about you. Remember, you're not watching this channel, you're part of a movement, a holy uprising of the overlooked becoming the undeniable. Until next time, keep standing, keep shining, keep being exactly who God created you to be. The darkness already knows your name. Now it's time for the light to announce it. Stay blessed, stay chosen, stay ready.